Okay, today we're on chapter 2 on integers. So this is section 2.5, order of operations with integers. So as usual, PEMDAS is the rule to follow. So now the absolute value is included in the grouping symbol. So that's a key thing that we have to remember. This is now considered a grouping symbol. So we have parentheses or other grouping symbols like the absolute value. And what's inside of those are done first. Then we do the exponents, and then we do the multiplication and division together, and then addition and subtraction together. And again, this is from left to right. And this is also from left to right. Okay, so we do it in that order. So let's look here. So if we've got the parentheses, nothing inside of there is operation, but we have this exponent. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take and square everything inside those parentheses. So that's going to say take a -4 times a -4. So we're taking everything in there and squaring it. Because what happens is whatever squared is right before it, and right before it is those parentheses. So we have to do it all. And so negative times negative, guess what? That becomes positive. Now we have 4 times 4, and that's 16. Now this one's different because here the parentheses were right before the squared. Right before the squared is just that 2. The 4 negative part is out in front of that 4. And so what we have is we have a negative, and then we're going to take 4 times 4. So that's the difference between here. So when you're seeing these, be sure to watch for how that squared part is, if it has that parentheses or not, because it really makes a difference, because now this one is a negative 16, whereas this one was a positive 16. So those mean two different things. Now here we have a subtraction, then we have a multiplication, and then we have another subtraction. And since parentheses are first, we'll do what's inside of here. So we'll take 6 minus 8. Well, we take the larger minus the smaller and take the sign of the larger. So 8 minus 6 is 2. The sign of the larger is negative. So we'll have a minus 3 minus 2 times a minus 2. Okay, so we did that part first. Now we have a -2 times a -2. Well, a negative times a negative is positive. And so now we have a -3, and then we have 2 times 2 is 4, so plus 4. Now we just have 4 minus 3, that's 1. Okay, so that, again, worked in parentheses first, did the multiplication next, and then we did the addition at the very end, or in this case, it ends up being a subtraction. All right, what about here? Okay, well, we've got stuff inside of parentheses we have to do first on 2 places. Then we have to square. Then we have to multiply, and then after that, we have to subtract. So we have a little bit of stuff to do here. So first, let's work here. 5 minus 6. Well, we take the larger minus the smaller and the sign of the larger. So 6 minus 5 is 1, and the sign of the larger is negative. So we have -2 times -1 squared. So we just simplified that piece so far. Now, here we have 5 minus 7. Well, that's larger minus smaller. 7 minus 5 is 2. Sign of the larger is negative, so that's a -2. Now we have squared pieces that we can work with. And so we have a -2 times a -1 times a -1. Remember, everything in parentheses goes there. Then -3 times, well, -2 is squared, so -2 times -2. Now what do we do? Well, negative times a negative is positive. Negative times a negative is positive. So now we have a -2 times 1, well, that's -2, times 1 more, it's still -2, so that's -2. Now here we have a -3 times 2, well, that's -6, times 2 more, that's going to give us a -12. Now we could rewrite that as -2 plus a -12, so we know that they're both the same signs. We can just add, so 2 plus 12 is 14. Take the sign of the common, and that's going to give us a -14. All right, now here, guess what? We almost have exactly the same problem, but instead of a squared, we've changed it to a cubed. Now we want to see what that does to the problem. Well, we already know that's equal to a -1, and we know that is equal to a -2 because we did that up there already. So now we have a -2 times -1 cubed minus 3 times -2 squared. Well, that second part's not going to change much, but this first part, now we have a -1 times -1 times -1. So we have to do that 3 times now, and then minus 3 times, and again, our -2 times -2. So now on the right, we have a negative times a negative is positive. Now we have this negative times this negative is positive, and this negative times this negative is positive. And so we have 2 times 1 times 1 times 1. Well, 1 times 1 times 1 is 1, times 2 is 2, so we have 2. And then this is still a minus 12 because we went through all this and we said, well, okay, well, that's -3 times 2 is 6, -6 times another 2 is going to be -12. And so this is really 2 plus a -12, or 12 minus 2 is 10, and the sign of the larger was a negative. So we have -10, okay? Now we could have actually had a cubed here as well, and then we would just have one more -2 here, and then that would have been a plus, and then we'd have had to take that 12 times 2 and got 24, so we'd have had 24 plus 2 are 26. So changing that to a cube makes the whole thing positive, and it makes it a 26 as far as the number goes. All right, here we're going to work from, remember, left to right, because all we have is a division and a multiplication. So first, we're going to take and do that division. So we'll take a -48 divided by 6 is our first thing. If we think about that, 48 divided by 6, well, 6 goes into 48 8 times, that's 48. Subtract, we get 0. So when we take that divided by that, we get a -8 because we have a negative divided by positive is negative. And then we still have times a -2. Okay, well, -8 times a -2, well, that's going to be a negative times negative is positive, and that's going to give us 16. Okay, and so that would be our answer. Now, see, we had to work left to right. What happens if we would have worked right to left? We wouldn't have gotten the same answer, because this would have given us a -12. And then -48 divided by a -12 is going to be a +4, which is totally different than a 16. So we really have to be careful as far as what we're doing. We have to work from that left to right. Now this one, we have just multiplication, and then we have our exponents. So all we're really going to do is we're just going to expand everything out. So -3 squared, well, that's -3 times -3. -2 cubed, well, that's -2, -2, -2. Okay, so now what we've done is expanded out to all the possible things in one row, and now we can say, well, negative times a negative is positive, that negative times that negative is positive, and that negative times that negative is positive, and we've run out of negatives, so guess what? Our final answer is going to be positive. Now we just have to multiply. So 4 times 3, well, that's 12. Now 12 times 3, well, that's going to be 36. But if you need to, go ahead and write it over here. 3 times 2 is 6. Then 3 times that's 3. And so we get our 36. Now we have to take it times 2. Well, let's go ahead and just keep on going down. So 6 times 2 is 12. Carry 1. That's going to be 6 plus 1. That's 7. So that's going to give us 72. Now we go over here and do another 2. And so make sure we can read that 2 when we multiply. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 7 is 14. So we get 144. And then we have it times one more 2. And so when we multiply that last time, we get 8, 8, and then 2. Okay, so our answer is 288. Now, sometimes, we have those two, and then we could say times 3, and here we could say times 2, times 2, times 2. That way we kind of keep track of all of the numbers going down instead of maybe we drew our bar over here wrong. And so then we know pretty much that we have all of our numbers here multiplied at this point here. So we know our final answer is then 288. All right, I'll pause here and come back in a second.